Hello and welcome to CBN News and our YouTube channel. I'm joined by George Thomas. I am CBN Managing Editor Dan Andros, by the way. Glad you are here with us. And talking to George, we got an important topic here, George. Religious persecution, religious freedom around the globe. You are in Washington, D.C. right now at a summit that's taking place to address this. And obviously we know from all of our reporting, from all your reporting, there's just a lot going on right now as far as persecution goes around the globe.
That's right. Yeah. So this is an annual event that brings together sort of a bipartisan group of politicians, faith groups, NGOs, human rights groups from around the world. They converge here on in our nation's capital. The conference, the summit begins tomorrow, runs through Wednesday evening. And it's a very, very important event here at the early part of the year to talk about, to continue to put the focus on the issue of human rights and in particular religious persecution around the world. And as you mentioned, we at CBN News have been covering this extensively for many, many years. And Dan, the really bad news is that today some 80% of the globe, which is just
all right, we're waiting. George's connection appears to have been lost there, but I want to just remind you all that as we work on getting George's connection back there, I think they've got him down like in a bunker of some kind at this this conference, so the connection's a little bit tricky. But I want you to leave your questions in the chat for George to answer. George has reported all around the globe. Those of you who are familiar with his reporting has seen him report from pretty much everywhere you can think of. You name it, he's been there, in China and Africa, places like Nigeria right now that are just suffering immense persecution. And this summit right now in Washington, D.C., you're going to have a lot of speakers here that are trying to call attention to this, is what they're doing, and in order to combat it, because it's really, really increasing and intensifying around the globe. And of course, as Christians, that should concern us for Christians, but also for all others who are being persecuted as well. As Christians, we're called to do that, to care for the oppressed and to care for those who are suffering in that way. So again, get your questions for George there in the live chat when you get a chance. If you have a question about a particular country, maybe that has been on your heart, your mind. I mean, we've seen a lot of stuff from Nigeria, some really shocking stories of pastors being targeted and killed and shot just for their faith. We've seen the same from India as well, where you're seeing intense religious persecution there. And of course, in places like China, where they're rewriting the Bible and just completely crazy things that are happening to our fellow believers in Christ that are in these different places in the world. So I think we might have George back now. George, can you hear me now? They've got you.
It's interesting because, you expect some of these things, guys, to happen like in Mogadishu, Somalia, or Kabul, Afghanistan. Or Baghdad, Iraq, right, or Gaza, right, where things are kind of exploding and there's no, it's like a firefight. And here we go. So sorry about that, guys. Yeah, my computer crashed in the middle of our session. So I do apologize. But thanks for sticking with me.
Yeah. Well, and I can remember, when you were in Ukraine for an extended period of time reporting on the war there. I mean, we had a live stream as clear as day. You got rockets are falling all around you, and then there's George on the live stream, like clear as day. And then we get into Washington, D.C., and it's like, wait a minute, what's happening here?
I know, but I was I don't know where we got cut off. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, well, I was just talking to the folks here who've joined us in the live stream, just about kind of the general state of persecution around the world, and maybe what this summit's trying to address and accomplish by gathering all these people around to talk about the various religious freedom issues that are popping up around the globe.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, as I mentioned, almost 80% of the population today on the globe here today, they're facing some form of persecution, and there is no indication guys, that this is in any way diminishing. In fact, it's only increasing. And what's interesting is that, they're going to be addressing some of the trends when they look at the trends, the emerging trends in 2024 and in the years to come. What are the new trends? And one of the biggest trends, guys, that is affecting people around the world when it comes to their ability to practice their faith with no restrictions is technology. And how countries, for example, China, the number one country that really is deploying this new trend of this technology to curtail those who want to believe in something other than the Communist Party. And so the folks here, there's going to be a session tomorrow. I think that's going to be tackling this very issue of how countries like China today are deploying AI, artificial intelligence, and facial recognition in order to keep track of those the Communist Party views as hostile, as a threat to Chinese national security. So it's one thing if it's only China, right? But then what China is doing is that they are then exporting that very technology that they've created to other rogue regimes. For example, North Korea, Iran, you look at Saudi Arabia, you look at India. So the challenges today facing people of faith around the world, be it Christian, Muslim, atheist, or any other group, are quite enormous. And so that's why tomorrow, the start of this two-day summit, people from across the political spectrum, Republican, Democrat, Independent, atheists, Christians, Muslims, Baha'i, Hindu, Buddhists, all coming together to address this issue that they are facing in a very, very real way.
Yeah, indeed. And George, I was telling the folks here online about how you've been essentially, and you name it, you've been there. Tell me about, like, to give people a sense of, because I think here in America we have certain religious freedom protections. Now it's getting a little more dicey day by day here, even here, right? But it's on a whole nother level in some of these other countries. So can you sort of just describe the state of existence for a lot of believers in different parts of the world?
Yeah, absolutely. It is one of those very important principles that's enshrined in the First Amendment here in our Constitution, in our American Constitution. And so we in many ways take it for granted. But as you mentioned, over the last few years, we have seen a kind of a restriction, a crackdown on what we can say and so forth. But around the world, the estimates are from various groups, from Open Doors to Christian Solidarity International, to others, close to about 365 million Christians today around the world are suffering for their faith, be it from North Korea, as we've reported the World Watch list that's put out every year by the great group Open Doors. Once again, for the 20th plus year, North Korea is at the top of that list. Somalia, India, Nigeria, Yemen, Eritrea, and as I've mentioned, I've reported in so many of these countries the level of persecution that believers face, Christians face. You take, for example, one of the trends that's emerging in the last few years is a sort of nationalistic ideology, this nationalistic fervor that's rising in many, many countries. So what happens, like, I'll give you a perfect example. Today, the world's largest, most populated country, India, has deployed these Hindu nationalistic fervor that, to be an Indian is to be a Hindu. But you got to keep in mind that India has a huge Muslim population. They have a very sizable Christian community. And so this what they call Hindutva, this Hindu ideology is permeating society and is putting so much restrictions on those who don't belong to the ruling orthodoxy, the ruling faith group in the country. So we're seeing these very alarming trends that are emerging. And in many of these countries, be it in Yemen, in Eritrea, in Gaza, in Saudi Arabia, in Nigeria, in Iran, what Christians face is, they have to, as we've reported, they have to practice their faith in secret. And they go through incredible various things that they have to do in order to meet. They can't meet like we do every Sunday here around the country in big churches. They are predominantly in very small groups, very undercover, very covert. Christians can't publicly talk about their faith. So these are some of the challenges that they face, and ones that we have reported extensively over the many, many years.
Yeah, indeed. And, I was looking at the clip there as you saw Enes Kanter was there last year. Enes Kanter Freedom is his name right now. But George, what can we expect at this summit? What are their goals here, right? Because obviously this is such a massive problem, right? And so it's going to take a lot of work to turn some of these countries around and to change views and freedoms that people have. What's their goal here? What's their kind of primary objective?
Yeah, for the folks, the organizers of the International Religious Freedom Summit here, it's to showcase that the United States is taking the lead role on this matter. In essence, telling people around the world, governments around the world, that when you talk about the issue of religious freedom, it's not an issue that exists in a vacuum. It's very much tied to foreign policy. It's very much tied to education, to access to health. It's tied to the rights that women have in societies, right? And the ability to access education, freedom of thought, freedom of conscience. It's so the idea that religious freedom, exists in a vacuum is something they want to buffet against. They want to say, listen, it's very much tied to how you run your economy, how you run governance in your country. And the United States and the organizers want to send a very, very clear signal that the United States wants to take a leading role to show as an example to the rest of the world, to these various countries that, listen, religious freedom, when you guarantee your citizens the ability to believe in something, to believe in nothing, that is a right that absolutely should be protected. We're going to be in the next 2 days. I'm hoping to get a chance to interview some key leaders who operate in some of these sensitive countries, who have been working tirelessly over the many, many decades to change the landscape. We're going to be talking about the situation in Cuba. We're definitely talking about the situation in China, in India. We'll also talk about the ongoing conflict in the Gaza Strip, what this means for the growing problem of anti-Semitism, as we've seen since the horrific attacks by Hamas back on October 7th. We'll be looking at the widespread growth of the evil of anti-Semitism, not just here in the United States, but around the world. We'll talk about the crisis in Ukraine and the religious challenges, religious freedom challenges that Ukrainians who are under right now under Russian control in areas in the east, what they are experiencing. And you can look at it from North Korea to Ukraine, to the Middle East, to parts of Africa, to parts of Southeast Asia. I'll hope to bring you some of those interviews starting tomorrow, running through Wednesday. And again, this is, look at this as an opportunity to understand firsthand, to hear firsthand from those who have to live through these situations, these circumstances in their countries. And then more importantly, it's an opportunity for our viewers to pray. Right? Because, when I meet believers in these countries, the one thing they always say to me, it's a theme that I hear over and over and over again, Dan. They say, don't pray that the persecution would be lifted. They ask us to pray that they would have the spiritual spine to stand. When the tough gets going, when the intensity intensifies, when the persecution intensifies, they always ask, would you pray that we will not buckle under the pressure, that we will not collapse under the pressure of what we are facing, which is incredible, right? We don't understand that. We can't empathize with that to the extent of what our brothers and sisters are experiencing in China. So when you join me tomorrow on Tuesday and Wednesday, I really want that to be sort of a clarion call, a focus, that you will be prompted to pray. Maybe you will, I'll give you an idea. Maybe you will adopt a country. Maybe you'll adopt a people group or a particular situation. Maybe there's a theme that runs through the interviews that you'll hear tomorrow, and that God will move on your heart to pray, and that there would be a breakthrough in these many countries. The good news is that in the midst of the persecution, there's a saying where the blood of the martyrs is the seedbed of the church. And today we look at what's happening in Iran, one of the worst violators of religious freedom in Iran. Iran today is one of the fastest countries in the world that we're seeing the growth of Christianity. The same thing we can say is happening in China. So in the midst of suffering, God is still on the throne, and he is using the persecution to grow the church. And that is the good news. And we will hear those stories, those testimonies over the next 2 days.
Yeah, looking forward to those. And you took my next thought about that's exactly what I was thinking, that this is how we can pray for because we're sitting here, right? A lot of us, we're sitting at home, watching this on our phones or our computers or whatever, and we're going to hear about these things. And we kind of think, well, what can I do? What can I do about that? And I think a lot of times we, even as Christians, maybe forget the power of prayer, that God hears our prayers, right? And so we've got to petition him. God's will, he's sovereign, his will be done. But nevertheless, he wants us to put our cares before him at the foot of the cross. And so a couple other countries mentioned here in the chat, George. We got Melissa mentioning northern Nigeria, a lot going on there. Vietnam, that's one I haven't heard a lot about. I don't know if you have anything going on there on your mind that you've seen recently. And of course, Burma. And a lot, I mean, it's just these areas. We've obviously seen a lot of the reporting in Burma from Dave Eubank, who's been there, doing amazing things there. And you see the violence that's happening to different ethnic groups there. So what's your reaction to some of those countries I just rabbled off?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are three those are three countries that continue to experience different levels of persecution. You look at, I've traveled across northern Nigeria extensively. I've been to Vietnam. In the situation in northern Nigeria is just horrible. You have a mixture of the conflict that pits Muslims against Christians. You also have the whole complex issue of farming rights, access to water, so that some of these tribal groups can allow their cattle to roam freely, have access to water, which is a very, very precious commodity up in the northern part of Nigeria. Nigeria is the Africa's largest country. It's evenly split between the Christians in the north and the Muslims, the Muslims in the north and the Christians in the south. And it's a place of ongoing conflict. I'm hoping to get a chance to talk to a leading expert who covers Nigeria for us, and we'll have that either tomorrow or the day after. But what we're also seeing in places like Myanmar, right? You've got the Rohingya Muslims. You got to keep in mind, right? We obviously we focus a lot of attention on Christian persecution. Why? Because Christianity faces the greatest amount of persecution as a minority faith. Keep in mind here in the U.S., we consider there's obviously a very large percentage of Christians, but in these other countries, be it Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Algeria, Mauritania, Bahrain, these Christians are the minority. And when they say close to about 365 million Christians around the world are suffering for their faith, keep in mind, because they are the minority in so many of these countries. But we also have to remember, Hindus are being persecuted. Buddhists are being persecuted. Rohingya Muslims, for example, in Myanmar are being persecuted. And that's why this summit is so important, because it brings people of different faiths together who are enduring their own form of persecution. Tomorrow, I'll get a chance to talk about India, where there's an incredible spike in the levels of persecution against Christians in India, but equally a faith that is equally experiencing the brunt of this Hindu fanaticism are Muslims. And it's so important that as we talk about the level of persecution against Christians, what this conference wants to spotlight as well is that around the world, people of other faiths also suffer various forms of persecution. And when you come together like this here in Washington, D.C., you have that common denominator, guys, right? And we have to, it's like the saying, when one part of the body suffers, the entire body suffers. And so when Muslims come together with Christians and say, hey, listen, how do we speak out for our fellow countrymen in India, where because you are Christian, you suffer. Well, guess what? Because I'm a Muslim, I also suffer. Let's combine our forces together. Let's join our forces to say, listen, we have to speak together. Even though we follow different faith groups, different tenets, but we all are suffering. And it's an opportunity for them to come together. So we'll continue to highlight those countries: Vietnam, Nigeria, as you mentioned, Burma, Myanmar, all countries that are experiencing some form of persecution.
All right, George, great info there. And we're looking forward to all your interviews here in the next couple of days. I'm seeing everybody weighing in on the chat now. And for all of you who have tuned in for this and you're interested in this topic and how you can be praying for people around the globe who are suffering these religious persecution incidents and just ongoing sort of attacks and things of that nature. Stay tuned. George is going to be going live here over the next couple days with interviews and updates from the International Religious Freedom Summit. Very, very important stuff, George. So we're looking forward to the updates here so that we can be praying with an informed mind. So appreciate you, George, and we'll be looking forward to your updates.
All right, terrific. Thank you.
All right, God bless you, sir. And thank you all in the chat. We'll just stay tuned. Make sure you look for that notification bell so that you can be notified every time we're going live, and you'll see George when he pops up with his interviews and everything else. So God bless you all. Thanks a lot.